Welcome to the County Chronicle podcast. This is our first episode of the 2025-2026 school year, and today we'll be discussing literature, how it's defined, and its value. To start off, we'll go around and say each other's names. My name is Ashley.
I'm Karan.
I'm Scarlett.
And I'm Abigail.
How would you guys define literature? What does it mean to you?
So actually, when I think of like literature as a whole, to me, literature is just anything that's like been written and is out there. And I know that sounds crazy a little bit, but like any form of writing that you'd give me, any sort of like essay someone's written, book that's been published, even if it's like a children's book, I count that as literature.
I think it's really interesting because you can sort of expand upon that. Like I was doing a little research about literature, and some people also include like oral stories as literature. Like it doesn't even have to be written. It can just be stories passed through like in time.
Like folklore?
Yeah, exactly. Like even from like ancient times, right? If you didn't have a means of writing it down, those stories are still literature because they still have value.
Right. But I think that's like where I personally draw the line. For me, in my mind, I've always envisioned literature as something that has been written down.
Scarlett, you said something about how something's literature because it has value.
Yeah.
I don't know that I necessarily think that's true. I think a lot of different forms of writing have value, but that doesn't make it literature. I think as a rule, literature is selective. So it's, in my estimate, it's not going to include stuff like children's stories and stuff like that.
Why not?
Well, because I think the idea that what's being written is universal and lasting, it differentiates it from a lot of other forms of work. You can write something that is still valuable, but won't necessarily have a universal or lasting impact.
Okay. So how do we determine that universal or lasting impact?
Yeah.
I think that takes time. And I don't totally know. I think there are a lot of things that are written today that in 20 years might be considered literature, and I have no idea. I mean, this is just...
Yeah, because like people talk about modern literature, but it's sort of hard to define that when we don't really know how that literature is going to hold up to time.
Right, yeah, exactly. So I think for our purposes, I think, Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, like I think that's literature. And I don't totally know how to define it, but I think to include children's books, for example, with Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and call that all literature, I think that's just anything that's written, and I don't think that's what literature is.
Okay.
I think there's a reason that we study literature and that we continue to read literature generation after generation after generation. You know what I mean?
I think that can also be applied to children's stories as well, though, because children's stories can also have a universal or lasting impact. Like they can still be read across generations to generations. Yeah. So that definition can still apply.
What would an example of that be? Can you name a children's book
I would
that you
say
would consider
like
literature?
any
Dr.
Dr.
Seuss.
Seuss. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like
Yeah.
he's very recent compared to like a lot of other literature that we study. We don't study Dr. Seuss, but like literature that's often discussed in schools. I mean, he has his own day dedicated to him that people are like, oh my gosh, it's Dr. Seuss Day. But it's like, but he's still recent. He's still kind of fresh, and he's an author of children's books. I mean, it's just silly little rhymes with silly little pictures, but I would consider his work literature because it's something that's made a lasting impact on many people.
Actually, I have studied Dr. Seuss books in high school. What is it? The turtle one. Yertle the turtle.
Yertle the turtle?
Yertle the turtle is actually a political.
What?
Yeah.
Isn't that how all of his... I feel like
a lot of his are
works.
political. So
Yeah.
to say that simply because it's a children's book doesn't mean that it has lasting impact. That can't really be true if we have examples of that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like my personal definition of literature is much more like straightforward and logical, if that makes sense. Like it's not just like how I perceive it. It's just I feel like literature is just anything that has gone through a process to be published.
Okay,
Like,
I think...
Okay.
Yeah.
Earlier when I was talking about how written works, like anything that's been written down is how I can, like, what Ashley just said is exactly how I see literature.
Cool.
And then when you were like saying your definitions of literature and you were talking about how Jane Austen and like Emily Dickinson and like all of those like actually like what we consider like AP literature, like people, you know, and like you were like, when we combine their works with like children's book things, that's not like sort of what you perceive literature as. All of the authors that you listed as like the people that you do consider literature is what I consider like classics.
That's how I feel as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
classic literature. That's just one aspect of literature.
Exactly.
And it's also, we were talking about how right now, like, we don't know modern books. Like, we don't know if they're literature or, like, they're considered to be literature at this moment because we don't know their lasting impact now. But at the time that those stories were written, they didn't know that either. But they were still considered literature in the time. So to argue, like, that we don't know if it's literature or not, like, we can sort of, I feel like, predict the impact of something now.
Sure.
Also,
I
sorry. If you were to stick to like, oh, like these classic things is what literature is, and like sort of like children's book or like something that doesn't have value to the writing. Is that what you said?
It feels like you're
I
putting
think-
things in a box. A
Okay,
little bit.
I think that Jane Austen and Charles Dickens are both examples of authors who
Exact-
have written good literature.
There
I
we
don't
go.
think that they're the definition of literature.
Sorry,
Okay,
that was
okay.
my bad. I
Okay.
was just trying to like try to get my point across. So when you give examples of authors like that as literature, of like those are people
You
that you
think
think
classics.
I do think classics, but then
Yeah.
how would you take like books now and like things that are being published now and like kind of like sort them into literature or not?
I don't know that I would, and that's only one, I don't know enough on this topic. Two, I think from what I do know, I would still say time is important, is an important indicator of what makes literature. I do think that you could have a children's book that becomes literature. I think you could have a short story that becomes literature. You could also have a novel. I'm not saying that, you know, because Jane Austen wrote novels, that only novels are literature or anything like that. I think there are a bunch of different mediums of literature, but I think it does take time for that to reveal itself. I think that literature is, it's not just about what's being said in the work, it's how it's being said.
Okay.
I think a children's book is, as a rule, targeted to children, and it's very straightforward, it's pretty simple, and you can have underlying, you know, political agendas or
Other
messages, or
messages,
yeah,
yeah.
sure. So that's totally possible. But I think that there's a difference in the way literature reaches what it's trying to say than other books.
Okay. It's interesting. Well, I was researching about like what forms of like written works are considered to be literature. And from what I've seen, what is it? Harlequin romances are not literature. They're essentially just like stereotypical romance novels where like, oh, there's this girl who's relatable who falls in love with this guy who's relatable. So those aren't considered, not all romance novels, just those specific types. And then also like graphic novels are not considered literature.
Okay, so that's a rule. So that even though those things went through a process and were published, that doesn't make it literature.
Yes,
but so that redefines your definition then.
But also, I'm just arguing. Sorry, I'm not arguing. I am stating like even though those things are not considered to be literature, there are people who argue either way. Like it's not a definition
Right.
necessarily.
It's not
just,
a rule.
It's not a rule. It's just saying people don't tend to think of graphic novels as literature. But I think that the type of graphic novel, like the story it's being presented, you could apply that to novels. We can also apply this to graphic novels, like the idea of literature.
Okay. I mean, I think you could take a bunch of different concepts and put it in a bunch of different mediums.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, the concept itself isn't literature or isn't a good quality movie or whatever you're talking about. It's how it's presented, which is what I'm trying to say.
I think your idea of literature is my idea of a classic. And like, so when you say that literature takes time to happen, like when I asked you about like how you would separate modern day works into like what's literature and what's not, you were like, oh, it would take time and I would have to see how it's like, you know, sort of like how the public's adapted to it, kind of. That's what I consider like a classic would be. So like if the public like keeps talking about it like 50 years from now, it's a classic kind of vibes, like you would say it's literature.
Yeah, I feel like
Okay.
your definition of literature depends a lot more on value than necessarily just like it being a thing, if that makes sense.
Right. That's yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if we took, I mean, already you've acknowledged that there are graphic
Debate.
novel. Yeah, that
Yeah.
there's debate about anything being published being literature. Why do we differentiate? Because for a very long time, I think people did differentiate literature and books.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think that everything ever written is literature, and that's a debate that we can have. But even if things aren't, written in a particular manner, and it's, we can have a debate about what makes that literature because of how it's written or the topics being addressed. I think it's also a matter of how it impacts society, not just how it impacts an individual. And so you could take a romance novel that means a lot to a specific person. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a romance novel that impacts like society as a whole. I think literature is universal.
What about Twilight? The Twilight series. I feel like that was a very societal impacting
This is
series.
true.
Would you consider that literature? Because that is a very popular series. I mean, they have the whole movie series made out of that, and
True.
many spin-offs have been made based on Twilight.
Well, first of all, I've actually not read it. Second of all, just it being popular doesn't make something literature either.
So
like,
would
I do think it's a mix of things. I'm not trying to contradict myself. I just think we're looking at individual factors and saying, oh, well, if this thing fits that category, it makes it literature. I think it kind of has to fit all of them.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I do think literature is selective, and so it takes a lot of different things to qualify something as literature, not just one thing.
So what are the different things that they should be qualified
what
as
factors
to
should they
be
include?
literature?
Or you're saying like it needs to be written or like presented a certain way. How would you like want to present that? Like how would you, if you were to read something, oh, it's presented this way, this feels like literature, what would that be?
Are you asking for examples, or are you?
I'm asking
first of all,
for your opinion, or like if there was ever a book that you read, you're like, oh, this is presented to me in this way, this is like what makes me think of literature.
Like what are your general rules, like quote unquote rules?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's universal. Second of all, I think it takes time, and I think that it has lasting value. I think something can be universal and reach a large audience of people, say Twilight, and still not have lasting value, because in 50 years, are people still going to be talking at Twilight? I don't know, because we haven't reached 50 years since Twilight. You know what I mean? Like, it takes all these things. And also, it's not just the medium. Like, it's not like, oh, this was written as a short story or in prose or as a poem. I think literature shows rather than tells, which I think you ask anybody, and anyone would say that that's, that just makes for a good book.
That's like a standard filming rule, like show don't tell.
Sure,
Yeah.
but I think literature does that in a very different way than a traditional
film.
book.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you read Great Expectations or Pride and Prejudice, I think the way ideas are presented are very unique than the way ideas are presented in Twilight or in, the common popular book at the time. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So then again, it's based on like value of the book, because like I don't know, that's how it sounds like it's coming off to me, if that makes sense. That's what I'm picking up. Or like how well it's written makes it literature. If it's written poorly or written like you were saying, if it's just like literally just telling how things are happening, not necessarily showing, then does that not make it literature?
I think three things. I think it has to be universal, have lasting value, and it takes time to be qualified as literature. For example, I don't think you could say The Summer I Turned Pretty is literature. Yeah. Is it a book that went through a process and was published?
That was crazy of you to bring that up in here, because I do think The Summer I Turned Pretty is literature.
Okay, so it went through a process and it was published, so it's a book, yes.
Yes.
And are there ways that where it's, it shows and doesn't tell? Sure.
Okay.
I don't think, maybe I'll be proven wrong, but in 100 years, I don't think we're still going to be swooning over The Summer I Turned Pretty because of how well written it is and how much it's impacted everyone in their personal lives, or how it's helped them grow or realize things. And I think literature does that. Maybe not every piece of literature, it may not do all of those things, but I think to simplify things, I think literature is the highest caliber of writing.
Okay.
I don't think, I think it's a high standard. It's a high bar. As a rule, you can't take that high bar and say that everything is literature then. So,
I understand that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I get
so
it.
that's my interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
What your definition of literature is like what I would consider just like a good book in general. In
Yeah,
a way,
like
if that makes
same.
sense, or like a well-known, or maybe
That's
not classic, but
Okay.
anything back to the Twilight example.
say
Like
with
maybe
this.
it's not literature, but like it's a book, it's a piece of writing. But literature, like you said, yeah, it has that like specific value to
Yeah.
it.
Sure. Would
Okay.
would you guys agree? Because I think there are other points that I think I'd like to make, but I don't know that I can make them if we can't agree on a definition. Or at least for the sake of an argument, accept the definition.
I agree to an extent that, like, for something to, like, it has to be well written and it should have value, like, literature should have value. I agree with that. But I also, you're saying things have to be well written as well, right? Like, it's high caliber writing. I don't know, I feel like, I sort of disagree not only, like, with what you're saying, but also what other people think. Like, I think that graphic novels can be considered literature and things like that, or even fan fiction and things like that. And I know that you're making fun of me right now. I don't even care. But
Well, why is that?
Well,
I feel like fan fiction over the years has gotten like a negative sort of connotation.
Well, the thing about, at least for me, fan fiction is an art form that has been around for centuries. Like, it's not a recent thing. It's not just smut or what people consider that to be.
Yeah.
It's more than that. But the point what I was trying to make with that is that oftentimes, like, with comic or like webcomics specifically and fan fiction, the writing itself is not well done. Partly, like, it's not good writing, especially for webcomics, since oftentimes the writers are foreign. Their English is not their first language, so they don't actually have a means of writing it well. But the points and values that they are trying to bring up are things that I believe are, like, lasting discussions that we should have, or values that we should discuss. So they still have merit while not being well written or not being high caliber.
Sure. Well, I think I'd agree with you. I think it's not that I don't think I've ever read a fan fiction thing in my life. I mean, there's a lot I haven't read. There's a lot I don't know.
Yes,
but I think, I'll take your word for it. It's not well written. But I think
Not all the time. Sometimes it is.
Sure.
But
So
this is the thing
if
I
it's
wanted to
not
say
well-
when you were talking about fan fiction. Do you
sorry.
consider like Greek mythology fan fiction? Like when they're talking about like Achilles and like Hercules
Wait, that's
and all
so interesting. I didn't
Right.
even question
What
that.
do you mean like
is that not its own
ancient?
category, like mythology?
that. Obviously, it's
I
mythology.
thought it was its own
but
Are you
would
talking
it,
about like
would it be fan fiction? Because you're taking like these characters and you're like having them go through
Well,
these stories.
there is fan fiction about Greek mythology that was written during the time. Like, it does exist.
But is that
I don't think
fan
that
fiction, or is
the
that just
mythology?
like
I don't believe the mythology itself is fan fiction.
Okay.
There's fan fiction about the mythology
Okay.
yeah?
from
Okay.
the time. And there still is fan fiction about it today as well. But what was I going to say? Oh, in my head, mythology at the time, I group mythology and religion as the same thing. In my head, mythology was just the religion of the time in that
Yeah.
region. And so the mythological stories can't be fan fiction because that was the religion followed at the time.
Okay.
And you wouldn't call,
Okay.
like, the Bible fan fiction. Like, that
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Well, I had a point about, talking about fan fiction. I think, it's not well written. Maybe English isn't the first language, so it's hard to make it well written.
Yeah.
I don't think, so I wouldn't call that literature. But it doesn't mean, to your point, that the concepts aren't still important and of lasting value and still being talked about today. I think we can still talk about those things and write about those things and make movies about those, same topics that are written about in fan fiction. And it doesn't make fan fiction literature, even if it is well written.
Okay.
So I think, again, the concepts, take any concept that has lasting value, we can continue to talk about it and write about it, and it doesn't mean that everything ever written about it or ever made based on that concept is of high caliber. I don't think it's an insult to say that fan fiction isn't literature. I just think it's, by virtue of what's created,
I see what you're
not
saying.
everything's literature.
Okay. Like, even if they're discussing an important topic, like, there are other things discussing that important topic as well.
Yeah, the concept isn't literature. It's what's produced that's literature. So fan fiction, talking or dealing with
This
whatever
specific
issues
topic.
of the heart or whatever, like that, that fan fiction isn't literature, but you can have other pieces of literature that do talk about issues of the heart. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're taking a lasting theme and creating a bunch of different art forms
Okay.
with that theme, based on that theme.
Okay.
But it doesn't, we still have to have some sort of level of, what is quality, what is, really not good quality. Like, having that conversation, I think, is important.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, to like kind of summarize, I guess, we've established, I guess, that literature is kind of quality works, whereas, but like things like fan fictions,
Lasting quality as well.
yeah, lasting quality. Whereas like anything that's not literature is just, what would you put a form of writing, I guess?
Yeah.
How
like
would
writing,
what would you
like,
call?
a medium of writing, or like a story in itself is not literature.
Okay.
Like, I mean, you could argue that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
If we were going to say that anything ever written is literature, then the essays I write for my AP US history class, that'd be literature.
Yeah.
Like, we need some sort of set standard, is my point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think I don't understand, to me at least, like, I do understand your point, but for me, I feel that it differently. Maybe this is just because I'm like, ugh, it's how I feel. But when you're saying things have to be, like, literature has to impact society and be universal, like, I understand that, and it does seem like, from the definition, that seems to be what literature is thought of as, but it does sort of hurt that something that could affect me so individually doesn't really seem to matter as a whole. Like, it feels like by saying something's not necessarily like not literature, but like saying it's not literature because it doesn't affect other people the way that it affects me, it sort of feels like, well, maybe the reason that it's not affecting other people is because they just don't want to like look into the concept or understand what the story's talking about. I feel like, does that make sense?
I think that's
Kind of.
I think it makes sense. I think it's a different argument than defining what literature is.
Yeah.
I think because you could have pieces of literature that appeal to some people and not to others.
Like, universal being is in everyone, not everyone knows about it, but like it applies to everyone, or is that what that means?
Yes, I think literature applies to the majority of people, and that's because literature reflects values that society still adheres to. And it does that in a way that differentiates it from every other book. So you can personally dislike a piece of literature or even be unfamiliar with it, and I'd argue that you can still be impacted by it because the society that we live in has been shaped by it to an extent. Partly because of the content and partly because of how it's been portrayed, how it's been written.
Like, I do believe that whether a story or book impacts an individual versus whether it impacts society is just as important. I feel like something cannot be as well known and still be important, and it could still be considered literature as well.
Okay.
People's experiences are not applicable to everyone else's experiences, and to discount those minority experiences just because people don't understand them or they're not applicable to like the vast majority of people who are not going to be interested in reading that because they don't experience it is disregarding something that we should be looking into.
Well, I don't actually think that it's disregarding other individual experiences. You take Sense and Sensibility and you have a child who's born out of wedlock. That's not a story that very many people could relate to today on a, you know, in that time that was very culturally unacceptable. I think now that's much more acceptable. So I think reading that story, I think very few people would say, oh my gosh, that's my experience. I was shunned. I was looked down upon, or I had to, you know, live this terrible life because nobody respected me because I had a child out of wedlock. Like, I don't think that experience is relatable to a lot of people today, at least in America. But it doesn't mean that the story as a whole doesn't still have lasting value to other people, right?
What?
So I don't think that it's supposed to be discriminatory against other experiences and say, you know, if this story was written about something but it's not considered literature, it's because that experience doesn't matter. I don't think that's what literature is doing.
Yeah, but I also feel like it's not just like the entire topic. I feel like people can feel connected to a book in so many different ways. For example, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I read that book. It's basically about a guy with like a huge ego who just can't live down to the fact that he's not always going to be perfect. And I wouldn't say I relate to him on the part, I mean, at least I hope. I don't think I have a huge ego, but like I do. I mean, I felt kind of seen through that idea of like being desperate to like be perfect your entire life and to always be looked up upon. But I mean, yes, it is an underlying theme, but it's not exactly what it is. I mean, what it is he, in a way, like kind of indirectly almost like sells his soul. He doesn't like, there's nothing directly that happens, but you know, the artist paints him and his soul is represented through that picture or the painting for the rest of his life, but physically he's still young looking. And like in the end, he becomes this horrible person and all of this stuff. And then he ends up dying because he sees himself in the picture and sees how horrible his soul has become, and he tries to stab the picture, and then he ends up unintentionally killing himself. And obviously I've never experienced that, but like I still find that like relatable, of that like sense of like needing to be perfect all the time. So I don't know, I'm just saying like what you were saying with that example of like the with Pride and Prejudice, it's not like that specific thing is going to happen to everybody, but somebody might pick up something from that, or just like being shunned from society in general.
Just like one aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Sure. Hopefully this quote makes sense. It's from an article that was written by someone who writes books. He said he differentiated himself in the very beginning. He was like, I don't write literature. He said, popular fiction authors want to reach as many readers as we can, so we write to the reading level of the majority of the population. We choose the best possible words to communicate the emotion, setting, and action required to move our story forward, draw our reader into our imaginary world, and let them leave it feeling entertained. Most typically, literary fiction is profoundly philosophical about human nature and the meaning of life. Its audience does not expect it to conform to any scope and genre conventions or language accessibility. So that's that idea that like literature is universal and designed to portray themes and values, whereas other like books and popular fiction and stuff is more typically targeted to the mass majority of people who can read that and feel entertained.
Okay.
So I don't know if that helps sort of clarify what I'm trying to say.
It's like they're both reaching like a universal audience, but they're reaching it
for a very different purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that sort of sums up my point and might make a little bit more sense. But
okay.
Karan, do you have any thoughts? It's been a while since we've heard from you.
No, I've just been like listening to what everyone has to say, and I like kind of agree with a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But, like now hearing what literature is to you, I'm like, yeah, like I get the vibe. So
Great. Yeah. Well, I also wanted to bring up, since this, or I think this sort of ties into like we're talking about popular literature versus like, or popular novels versus like literature. We were talking about like the downfall of literature and how styles of literature have changed over time and the effects of that. So I know that you have opinions about that, if you want to.
I do. Okay. Do you want me to go into it?
Go ahead.
So I feel like, okay, when I say literature, I'm talking about any kind of book. I'll just say books now because we've established that literature is like high quality work, basically. Well,
For the sake of the argument.
for the sake of the
Sure.
argument, So I feel like, books have kind of been more disappointing to me, if, like, the more modern they are, and whatever is like a popular book right now is just very based on tropes that have been repeated over and over and over. If you walk into a bookstore and sometimes, like, if you go to Barnes and Nobles, and you'll see sometimes, most of the time, they'll have like sets of books that are like popular out in the front.
Like Book Talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, specifically Book Talk actually was what I was going to get to, is has
Always a
kind of,
target.
like, we all know that social media heavily influences the world around us. And I feel like social media has been influencing books too much, to the point that authors are writing books that will look good for social media and that people will read. And it's not even good writing anymore. It's just to get, it's a marketing thing. And I think that takes away the art of writing, because writing is usually, I mean, it's an expression. It's supposed to be something, that you truly feel. And if you're just doing it to get attention, to get sales and all this stuff, then it takes away the value and the quality, or not the quality, but the value of your work, I think.
I mean,
that
that
makes
makes sense.
sense.
Was
Okay.
literature, or like writing, is an art in of it itself.
Yeah.
It's just a different type.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I'd agree with you. I mean, it's a form of art. I don't think you would take a preschooler's painting that their mom put on the refrigerator and, liken that to Monet. I think, there's different calibers there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, similar idea.
But I also feel like, at least from a modern artist's perspective, making art, or in this specific case, books, for money or wealth and appealing to the masses to do that is sort of necessary in society. Like, you have to find the means to make money. You can't write what you want to write, because then people are not gonna, I mean, maybe they will, but oftentimes they're not gonna want to buy that. You have to appeal to the consumer a little bit if you're thinking about this from an economic standpoint. Like, it is an art form, but you also have to survive. Like, this is your job.
Right.
You have to make an income.
I have an add-on to this. Would you guys consider Little Women literature?
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Do you not think that was also sort of done to appeal to the masses at the time?
I know very little about the time, so I can't speak to that.
I think it was written during the Civil War, if I'm not correct.
I think so. It was
Yeah,
And,
late
because the father was
The
1800s.
off
girls-
that war.
Yeah, their dad
Oh,
is like
that's right.
off to
Yeah,
war.
yeah.
So like it's obviously appealing to a lot of the people at that time.
It
Do we
was-
not think that could have been a marketing strategy?
Actually, okay, maybe. I mean, I think definitely could have been. But I think there's a difference between acknowledging what most people are going to enjoy
Mm-hmm.
and still writing something of quality. Because even if she's marketing to the masses, she still wrote something that I would argue has a universal appeal and has that high caliber of writing, even though she was marketing, and then says, hey, this is something that I've noticed in our culture. Let me write something that's going to appeal to a lot of people also concerned about the same issue. There's a way to appeal to people and make your money without just regurgitating what people have already written about.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
that was
but like
sorry.
a good enemies to lovers is so fire.
So
I have
yeah,
to
I mean,
agree
yeah,
with
it's
that. I love.
Okay, best friends.
This is.
but it doesn't make it literature, even if it's good, even if it's like kind of your
Yes.
comfort read. I mean, I reread the same like childhood books I read when I was in 6th, 5th grade. Like it doesn't mean they're literature just because I love them, and continually find myself drawn to them. That doesn't make it literature alone.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I understand that, but also I feel like, I think, well, at least for me, I read a lot of queer novels and things like that, and so for me, they have more of a like societally lasting impact, because it's like discussing issues that queer people face and also things that I can relate to. So for me, like, they're important for society, and I feel like tropes and cliches in queer stories are very, very common because the queer experience is oftentimes so universal. So even though there's so many tropes in that, I would still consider like a lot of what the queer media I read as literature, just because it is lasting. I mean, it has a societal impact because, I mean, obviously discussing that is a controversial issue in today's society, and always has been for the most part. And it is universal because there's enough of those people who can relate to the experiences that it can be applied to the mass majority.
I'm going to say something really controversial right now, and I disagree that would be, to be fair, I have not read those books, so I don't know. There's a lot, again, that I have not read.
I'm not saying like all queer media, I'm just saying that like specific. Like,
that what you read.
Not all of what I read, just like specifics.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think to say that is a universal appeal is still, I don't know that I would agree with that being universal. I think lots of people, have friends who are, dealing with things like that, or they are dealing with things like that themselves, or, I think a lot of people, and you take people from all around the globe who are dealing with things like that, but I still think that like LGBT like topic is still like a community of individuals. Like, I don't think, well, the point, how I'm saying this, because I think if you took a group that, you wrote something that appealed to Muslims,
yes,
like, and that could appeal to Muslims all over the globe, and it could be a massive group of people, but if it only appeals to Muslims or people with Muslim friends or Muslim family, then that's not universal.
Well, the point I was trying to make earlier was sort of what Ashley was talking about with the picture of Dorian Gray, where even though she herself is not egotistical, she can still understand that pressure of like needing to be perfectionistic.
Sure.
So even if you are not Muslim, then you can read a book about someone discussing their experiences as a Muslim and then still relate to them. And that can be applied to any minority group, including the queer community. Like, that can be applied. So even if you are not queer yourself or don't know queer people, you can say, oh, I felt this societal expectation to fit in and relate to a queer character.
Yeah. To add on to that, like, okay, confession, I've never read this book, but isn't there a book, was it The Color Purple or something?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And that's about racism, and I wouldn't say that, every single, like, it's not a universal experience to be an African American and experience racism.
Yeah. Do we have anything else to add on to our literature conversation? Because I feel like what we discussed is pretty valid, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Like, everything you had to say was valid. And I know we have, like, sort of not opposing views, but we have different definitions for different words.
Sure.
But it is more clear, like, kind of what you think.
Yeah. I think where things are tricky is that, if you make the argument that literature appeals to, most people over decades and decades or whatever, like, the majority of the population, like, in quotes, like, that's an ever-evolving landscape. And so how do you distinguish literature, as something that speaks to people who are young and old and, of different races and different backgrounds, like, at any given point in time? Like, I don't think you can tailor literature, I think would be probably my closing thought. I think it is pervasive throughout time and culture, and just as a rule, and is that high caliber that we were talking about.
So I'm pretty sure that was our literature episode today, and just stay tuned for more episodes to come on the County Chronicle podcast. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.
Bye.